7 p.m. in the UK, state-controlled Britain. And we've got in the room the top nutritionist, the UK's top nutritionist, Richard Smith. Hi, Richard.
Stephen, good day. Kind sir. Hope you're keeping well.
Yeah, I am keeping well. I understand that you've just been busy for an hour.
I did. It was meant to be an hour, but in true Richard Smith style, I managed to take an hour and a half, and I've quite literally just ended the call with in Dr. Chafee's channel. Met some fantastic people there, some brilliant questions. Thoroughly enjoyed that. But yes, in true Richard Smith style, I managed to talk right until the very end, and straight on to this, which is brilliant.
It is brilliant. Now then, we had some comments with some questions all lined up. And when we went live, StreamYard, in their wonderful wisdom, got rid of those comments. So I do apologise. If you've put a question up and we don't answer it, it's not because we're ignoring you. Literally, they have just flashed out all the comments, and I have no idea why that is. So I'll do the thing that I normally say. If you put a cube in front of your question, then we'll see it as a question and we'll answer it. If you want to have it answered as a priority, you can make sure it's answered by doing a super chat, which is always appreciated because we do these hours free of charge every single Sunday. So if you can help us, or we actually do an hour and a half, and as Richard just said, he did an hour and a half before this. Wow, you see? So it does help. Okay, so the first question, nice easy one to start with, from Tom J. Ideas for preparing beef heart: cooked like steak, slow cook, something else? I've cooked heart. I am not a very good cook, but that doesn't matter when you're carnivore because it's so simple. So what I do with heart is I cut it. I cut the bits out that I don't like the look of, and then I pan fry it. Simple as that. That is it. What about you, Richard?
Yeah, I used to be a fan of wrapping the heart up in foil with some butter. But look, foil isn't as beneficial for you as I once believed, so I no longer do that. So what I've done, what I tend to do now, heart is fantastic, by the way. Heart is incredibly high in ubiquinone, or coenzyme Q10. Coenzyme Q10 plays many functions within the body, and it's a potent antioxidant. It's an incredible compound. I slice mine, keep the fat on. Oh, yes. The fat is the best part. I slice the heart and I pan fry it like I would with a piece of steak. I don't add fats to cooking. I don't add fats to any of my cooking any longer. As you guys know, I'm not against it. I'm not telling you guys not to add fat. I just believe that everything that we need is found in the animal protein as it's provided to us. If I eat out, then I'll preference that my steak is cooked in butter, tallow, lard, or ghee. And it's usually butter, because this is what most restaurants have. And I'll do that because they don't understand about just dry frying and cooking it in its own meat. Because what I do when I cook, and this is the same for heart, is I put the lid on and I let it cook in its own juices and in its own atmosphere and heat, and it creates a lot of water. So you end up with, like a watery substance in the bottom. It cooks the meats differently. It makes it more tender. I believe it adds to the flavor. But it prevents it from charring also, which can increase and cause acrylamide, which Stephen and I have spoken many times recently. And it does this through a compound called acrolein, where the fat basically replaces the reducing sugars as it would in grains, or, and other compounds. And it causes the creation of acrylamide. So this is why I don't cook at high temperature. So even when I'm pan frying, the temperature's low. If I'm oven baking, I keep the temperature below 175. But that's how I cook my heart. Super simple. It's not extravagant, and apologies that it isn't more complicated than that, but slice it and pan fry.
Yes, brilliant. Now then, I've managed to find the questions that went missing. So I'm going to just put those in the chat. The first one, let's see if we can do this. Bear with me. It is about blood pressure. If not, I will just read it. Right. Okay. I'm going to just read the question rather than put it in the chat, if that's okay. Dilma Soto, seen studies that salt has an impact on the microbiome. Is this a positive or a negative effect? Skin seems better on no salt.
Sorry, Steve. I assumed because it was a Bloods, you were going to jump in with that. Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Actually, I thought it was right up your street.
Yeah, sorry. When you
seen,
mentioned Bloods, yeah, I didn't switch off. But
seen studies that salt has impacted on the microbiome. Is this positive or negative? Skin seems better on no salt.
So look, salt is an electrolyte. It's incredibly important and beneficial to the body, and it's required. We need it. We can't live without electrolytes. That said, the balance and the ratio is incredibly important. Now, what typically happens if we salt our meals with like a table salt or a Celtic sea salt or a pink Himalayan? Celtic sea salt is the better of these, by the way, by quite some margin also, because it's organic, unlike the pink Himalayan. But consuming this can put the potassium out of whack. Which alters the ratio and can cause issues. So some people do find that they get all of the sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium from the animal proteins they consume. If that's the case, then this is fantastic. We need these compounds at a cellular level to produce energy, to allow the transition of compounds between the cells and so on and so forth. So this is incredibly important. If you thrive on not consuming salt, then I see no reason to put it in. And what we tend to find within the ketogenic and carnivore community also is, because we lose the sodium as we gravitate into the lifestyle, we add salt to everything, which is brilliant, but this alters that potassium ratio somewhat. And another thing that can affect it massively is calcium. Calcium, it can offset and compete with magnesium. It depletes potassium. So within the kidney, the reabsorption of the potassium is affected, which puts that out of whack. So now that one compound has disrupted 4 electrolyte compounds. So what we put in is incredibly important, but what the ratio of these is more important. If you thrive on adding no salt, then don't put salt in.
That's brilliant. Yes. And the reason I sort of deferred to you is because you're the electrolyte guy. I think salt is one of those things that is very individual as well, because I see some people, and I also think it's a temporal thing. I think sometimes high salt works for a bit and then no salt seems to work. That's from sort of experience with a lot of people I've coached, where they seem to really love the salt. And I think this may be just down to a sort of like a debt in that electrolyte, from many years of avoiding salt and eating all the wrong foods. Suddenly your body just like, wow, there's an abundance. And I think if you just sort of take yourself back in time, maybe 2,000 years ago, and the scarcity of food was around, and you suddenly found somewhere where there was everything that you could possibly want, I think you would react differently, and you might chow down on all this stuff that maybe you wouldn't eat so much of and feel great, because there'd be some element in there. But if you look at, like, maybe, I don't know, the fat soluble vitamins, they can kick around in your system for maybe 3 years. So what if you're depleted, you might be, lots of fat is really working for me. But then once you've got your stores up to where it should be, and I always use the hormone, thyroid hormone, as the example, because we should have 50 days supply in our thyroid. And I have people come to me that completely depleted. Their thyroid is totally shot, so they have not even a day's supply. So I think it's great to answer questions like we do, but if you're out there thinking, well, I went high salt and it was fantastic, and then I felt really good when I came off the salt, it was you changing. It's not the salt is different or anything like that. It's just, I think we adapt and then we start to evolve. For instance, my meal tonight was lamb. Wow, it tasted so much better than beef. Well, when I started Carnivore, you couldn't beat a ribeye. So I think even just your palate and everything changes. So great answer from Richard, though. A bit more on point than me.
Steve,
this is sorry.
Just really quickly, and you've just made some incredible valid points there. That you do go through phases, and what I find is that when it comes to salt, you do it intuitively. Some days you add salt to your meals because your body knows you need it. Other days you do not. I would be interested to see if the person who asked this question consumes organ meats, because organ meats are a good source of electrolytes also. So it may be a case that you're getting everything you need there. But it does affect the microbiome. Everything we consume does. But the microbiome changes to the environment that we put it in. So if we consume certain compounds, the microbiome will grow to thrive off those things. And this is why, things like prebiotics and probiotics to feed the gut microbes are not always beneficial long term. They can help during transition, but if we want the microbiome to thrive on meat, then we need to feed the microbiome, for example, that feeds and thrives on that meat, and that's the microbiome that will grow. And there's typically two different phylum, the Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes, and one will predominate over the other depending on the environment that you put it in. But yes, of course it can. Everything that we consume has a massive impact, but salt. And the other thing, just to add, sorry, Steve, going off on one, too much salt can be problematic with people who are hyperthyroid as well, especially if it's iodized salt. So it's, my brother, for example, suffers with this. He can't consume things like olives and certain salt compounds and bacon. So it's another thing to bear in mind. There could be other things going on with some people. Salt or excessive amounts and certain types are certainly not for everyone.
Absolutely. This is from Matthew. Lion diet around 8 months or so. Blood pressure seems to have gone up, not down. What could cause this? I believe I have only implemented more healthy lifestyle changes with carnivore saturated fat. Right. So blood pressure. Don't get me started. So blood pressure. Okay. In the 1950s, when they used to do medicine properly, and they talked about your blood pressure, or they talked about your cholesterol. Cholesterol was 350. That was totally fine. LDL cholesterol was fine. And your blood pressure would be your age plus 100. And then you would subtract 40 from that to get the diastolic. So I'm 60. So my blood pressure, using that calculation, should be 160 over 120. Okay, because pulse pressure is actually more indicative of problems. So the difference between the top and bottom should be around 40. If it's 50 or it's 38 or whatever, don't worry. I'm talking about rough percentages. Now, when I was taught to do phlebotomy and take blood pressure, this might make a mockery of blood pressure readings, all right? But what you're actually trying to do is to take 3 readings. And what do you think you do? Do you think you add up all 3 and divide them by 3 to get an average? No, you take the lowest one. Okay, if you get a reading that's too low, you get the person to drink a glass of water, which I'm always talking about, and it puts your blood pressure up. So you could get them to get the blood pressure reading that you want. All right, that's what you're trained to do. After your 3rd reading in phlebotomy, when I did it, after the 3rd reading, if you're not happy, you get a doctor to come and do it. Right, that's it. Okay, so there's lots of things I could tell you about that. I mean, they used to call the blood house red, for instance, when we were collecting and taking bags of blood around. So anyway, so blood pressure, those rates have got lower and lower and lower, but they're not lowered based on health, because, hey, what's happening? We're getting fatter and sicker all the time, aren't we? And yet those numbers are going lower for cholesterol and they're going lower for blood pressure. The 120 over 80 is fine if you're a 21-year-old male athlete. That's where that comes from, by the way. I'm not 20. I'm male, yes. I'm not an athlete. I'm 60, and I have stiffer arteries.
You're an
well, thank you. That's very kind of you. So my blood pressure should be higher, because I want my blood to get around and get to my brain, which does work on a Sunday night. I want that. Now, go a bit further. Thought experiment. Okay, you got some giraffes and you got one with a really, really long neck. Would that blood pressure in that animal need to be more than the ones with a short neck? Yes, because you're fighting gravity. So you can't have this one size fits all for blood pressure. It's absolutely ridiculous. But it is a guide, right? So the first question is, what is high? Is it more than 120 over 80? And is it like 137 over 98 or something? Because that isn't particularly high when you look at age-related blood pressure readings. It's a great question. What could make your blood pressure go up? Demands, activity. You know, if you do a power lifter and you take their blood pressure when they're doing the actual lift, it goes to 400 over 200 because it's needed to
Wow.
be exceptionally high for a moment in time. So I'm going to hand over to Richard to answer a little bit because I nearly went on a rant then. But so Matthew, I love the fact you asked this question. I'm not ranting about the question. I'm ranting about blood pressure, how we look at it nowadays. Seems to have gone up, not down. But that's a response in my opinion. That is a response, and it's possibly a physiological response that makes total sense if you're more active. Certainly, if you go into the gym more, eventually, as you get more trained, you will find that your volume of blood going out of your heart will increase, and therefore you might see the blood pressure come down. But anyway, I'll let Rich add a bit more.
Love it. I love your rants. It makes me feel less guilty. Yeah, completely agree. A couple of other things that, I mean, 8 months, it does seem like a long time, but the body goes through lots of changes, especially if we're consuming lots of fat. Now, fat, I'm going to say something, and this is going to make you think that I'm saying that fat's the demon. Fat isn't a demon. It's not the bad guy. But the overconsumption of fat can cause slight strain on the heart. And I'm not saying this is a negative thing. This is just an adaptation process. It can cause a little strain on the heart. And we can offset this with some potassium. Potassium can calm the heart, or we can consume less fat. So what you could try is consuming leaner cuts. And I don't mean going super lean, because we do need the fat also. But if we look at an animal as a whole that we would have caught and killed and consumed, we would have consumed everything within this animal. This contains the fatty muscle meats, the leaner muscle meats, the organ meats that are not very fatty, and even the blood, for example. All of these things that we would have consumed. So some days we would have eaten lots of fat, and other days we wouldn't have consumed an awful lot of fat. Now, if we are consuming ribeyes or chuck steak or high percentage fat mince beef every day, or fatty cuts of lamb, then we're always in this higher fat state. We need to go back to how nature intended, how we've evolved, how have we been through our evolutionary period. Well, if we are to consume leaner cuts on some days, then it makes sense to do so when living a carnivore lifestyle. I'm not saying you have to consume organ meats. They are highly nutrient dense, and they do serve a big purpose. You don't have to, but they do help. But certainly mix it up with leaner cuts on some days. And I can't remember the gentleman's name. Apologies, because you've taken the message down. So I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. But try experimenting with lower fat for a couple of days. And spread the meals out. So instead of consuming one meal or two, maybe experiment with 3 meals throughout the day. So spread in the meals with less fat just for a few days. And experiment and test. So Matthew, test your blood pressure, through the course of this week, and report back and see if that's made a difference. And we can take that on the next call next week and go from there. But it'd be interesting to see the results from implementing that for a week.
Cool. Hopefully I'm catching all the messages. So if I look a little bit like I'm looking at millions of screens, it's because I am trying to make sure we don't miss any messages. Now, Mark did a super chat, £2. Thanks very much. Every little helps, I promise you. And that's great. Right. This is a question which I think is definitely right up Richard's alley. Weightlifting is not really ancestral. How do we know necessarily it's good for us in terms of longevity? Are we certain it doesn't cause unneeded stress? Just curious. Great question, Matt.
It is. It's a fantastic question. Matt, I agree. It's not ancestral. And I covered this very topic in Anthony Chaffee's school group recently, tonight, just before I come on this call. It's not ancestral. That is absolutely counterintuitive for survival. We need to travel long distances with spears and rocks and whatever else to catch our prey. And then we need to carry the prey back. So we need to have some form of endurance fitness, but we don't want to be muscle bound and carrying too much. It's absolutely counterintuitive. But there is somewhere in between. So I agree. And this is the reason that I came away from competitive bodybuilding, because I became too big for my frame. It started to cause lower back issues. And for me to progress further, it would have involved the supplementation of anabolic steroids. I didn't want to go down that route, again, because I'm living this lifestyle for optimal health and well-being. And all of these things are counterintuitive to this. Now, that doesn't mean that lifting weights is bad for us. Lifting weights increases muscle mass, and muscle mass improves insulin sensitivity. And it is proven, if we do this regularly, that it can increase longevity. And also the opposite end of the scale is the same. I don't believe that we're designed to compete in Ironman competition and run marathons at 6-minute miles and so on and so forth. Yes, we would have covered these distances while hunting and catching our prey, but we wouldn't have done it running sub 6-minute, miles. We do these things to achieve goals. And I believe that too much of anything is detrimental. So the question is, if you are weightlifting, what is your goal? If it's optimal health and well-being, then there are things we can do to put into place to structure this so you benefit from that aspect. If you want to be as big as possible, then you've got to come out of this box. You've got to come out of optimal health, and you've got to be willing to sacrifice some form of health and well-being and longevity in pursuit of perfection. I was no longer willing to do that. That's why I've come away from it. Now I've gone into endurance stuff, and this is probably even worse. So my cortisol has been affected massively from doing these endurance events, and I'm learning and understanding more through my study and through how my own body is reacting with these things. We wouldn't have done either, but they are opposite ends of the scale, but they're there because we want to achieve a goal. So Matt, it comes back to what you want to achieve, but I agree completely what you say. For optimal health, this is this is what I would put forward for optimal health, that we consume an animal-based diet, and this does include organ meats, but we eat as nature intended. So we eat the animal as a whole. We consume the blood, which we don't do. So this is why we consume electrolytes. But we would consume the cartilage off the bones, the marrow from the bones. We'd crush the bones up, and we'd eat every little part of that animal. And to do that intuitively while consuming 1 to 2 meals a day, while maybe throwing in the odd fast now and again, in my opinion, is going to be optimal for longevity, health, and well-being. Your requirement for any supplementation is going to be non-existent because you're doing so. But very few people live this way. Very few people crush the bones and eat the bone marrow and make bone broth anymore, and eat the bones and the cartilage off the bones and so on and so forth. Many people within our area of carnivore, get my hands, it's funny, the cameras are fun. Every time I put my hands up straight, then I'm not actually straight on the camera. Sorry, very few people even within the carnivore community just eat beef and lamb and salt and water, and that's fantastic. I don't believe that is optimal. I do believe that we should consume some, but again, it should be in proportion to the animal. So i.e. a small piece every day, or organ meat some days, and so on and so forth. I don't believe that doing this, bodybuilding, powerlifting, I don't believe that is good for optimal health. And the opposite, I don't believe running, sub 3-hour marathons and doing these other things are good for optimal health. That doesn't mean that they're bad for us, but we're talking about optimal health and longevity. And that's what I would put forward for being optimally healthy while moving, lifting some form of weight, because we would have been running to catch our prey, and then we would have been carrying this prey back. So there are elements of running, cardiovascular fitness, and carrying animals back to camp. But what we talk about when we go into bodybuilding and extreme endurance sports are the extremities of these sports, which we're not, genetically predispositioned for, at least I believe.
That's great. That is such a good answer. Thank you so much. We have got a question from Bacon of Health. Thank you for the super chat. I think SEK is Swedish currency. We've got 20 there, which is actually, I think, about £1.50 in pounds, but that's great. And the question is here. Can chewing gum after each coffee throughout the day raise insulin to the point it ruins fat loss efforts? That's a mixed question to me, because if you're drinking coffee, caffeine, you are well, actually, you're going to elicit a glucose response from the cortisol response that you're getting from the stimulation of the caffeine. So you're going to get an insulin thing from the coffee, but you're talking about the chewing gum. So what do you think, Richard?
Look, chewing gum contains a polyol called xylitol. Now, when we look at polyols, they're deemed to be sugar-free, but that isn't 100% accurate. There are very few polyols which are actually sugar-free completely. Erythritol is one. Glycerol, which is actually a type of fat, but also classed as a polyol, that is also sugar-free. But when we talk about xylitol and maltitol, for example, they still contain as much as 65% raw carb. So even though they're allowed to say they're zero carb or sugar-free, they're not actually sugar-free. Whether there's enough in there to elicit a response that's going to be negative is different from person to person. But make no mistake, they do contain sugar. If you're a chain chewer, which I used to constantly be chewing gum. One, you're increasing the gastric acids within the stomach and so on and so forth, which isn't ideal always, especially if you don't have anything in there. And you're consuming excessive amounts of xylitol, which is a known laxative also, which is why some people have toilet problems if they do chew too much. And we are swallowing some of this, because what some people will say is, well, I'm not actually swallowing the chewing gum, but you are actually swallowing some of the juice. Plus, you're performing what's called, or eliciting what's called a sulfatic response, which is where something sweet hits the tongue and the body thinks that sugar is coming. So yes, it can affect. How much, it's different with everyone. But as Stephen says, the answer to this, in my opinion, would be don't drink the coffee in the first place, because that is going to elicit a cortisol response. We can get well into the damage and effects of acrylamide. Maybe we can come back to that. Let's get through some more questions first.
Yeah, great. I want to add something as well, because chewing is what's called mechanical digestion, and you get what's called gastric stimulation. And I have had somebody recently do a success story where the two things they gave up were coffee and chewing gum, and they are so happy. And they were stuck. Doesn't sound like a big deal after we deal with people with MS and and lots of other really severe things like kidney failure. She just wanted to lose the last 5 pounds. That classic, I've got that little bit of belly fat, I want to get rid of it. And dropping coffee and chewing gum was all she did. And she did a success story. Took 6 weeks. Right. But don't forget, gastric stimulation. It's a good one to remember if you're chewing anything. Right. Cruz has got a 2-part super chat. Richard's going to love the second one. Let's do the first one, because this one's about my recommendation. Then we got one about Richard. So we're doing a good job here. So thank you very much for the $5. Thank you. I tried the Shakti original device recommended last week. I fell asleep on the third try in the first day. Wow. Seems to induce relaxation of the back, which is the whole point. It's an acupressure mat, Shakti, SHAKTI. I'll put a link in the description. We talked about the ascending, descending pathways, how it modulates pain, and boy, on school, we've had 4 or 5 people say how great they are. So wait for the link in the description if you're interested in that. Second one. Right. This is what, this is why Rich and I do these things. Cruz is saying also doing better on itchy skin after Richard's recommendation to lower fat. We'll book a consultation in the near future. So thanks for the super chat. Thanks for the positive feedback. And yeah, if you book a consultation, that's great too. So
incredible.
Lovely.
Thank you. Incredible stuff.
It's lovely, isn't it? Right, we'll go back to the questions. So we've done the weightlifting one. Well, let's go on to the next one, which is what are some other causes of acne outside of diet? Or does it just take a long time to heal on carnivore? Lion diet, mostly 9 months, better, but still some come. Had since age 13, now 35. Which is an age where you don't really want acne. So what do you think, Richard?
So look, diet is, apologies, I'm just copying my link, Steve, if you don't mind, for the consultations. Obviously, Stephen and I do offer consultations, and as the last one just mentioned consultation, I'm just popping that in. Steve, if you want to pop yours in as well, obviously that's what we do. That's what pays our wages, isn't it, is the private consults, and allows us to do these. Look, there are a number of contributing factors. Toxins in the atmosphere, the compounds that we find in the atmosphere, in the house, and dust, and so on and so forth. There's lots of contributing factors other than diet. But what I would say, as a severe sufferer of acne and severe boils previously, by far the biggest lever is your diet. Like, I very rarely suffer with severe boils or acne any longer. When I do, I tend to find that it's after a competition or an event where I've been competing, i.e. running, and been very sweaty, and it's opened my pores, and maybe it's been a few hours and then before I've had a shower, and so on and so forth. Sometimes you wear the same vest for two competitions on the trot, and it's so there are external factors to this, is what I'm getting at. But the biggest is the diet. And what I would say is, even on and in fact, the last comment is a fantastic segue into this, because fat can cause skin conditions, and sometimes lowering the fat can be beneficial. There are lots of compounds found in fats, especially from fats from aged meats, like histamines and so on and so forth. When they increase in the body, they can cause skin conditions. So avoiding aged meats is, and I can see Steve is itching to jump in on something. So look, there are compounds within the fats that we can consume that can cause skin conditions. And most of these skin conditions are caused by intestinal permeability, which are typically caused by lectins in compounds that we consume. So, for example, in sausages, they still contain rusk. If we are consuming plant compounds like bell peppers and cauliflower and so on and so forth, tomatoes, these also contain lectins, which can cause this. But there's a number of things. But one of the best things that we can do is diet. Detoxing increases glutathione, which allows us to clean out and remove most of these toxins. But Steve, I can see you're chomping on the bit there. I'll leave you keep in.
No, I think 9 months is a pretty long time, but it can take longer. And I have actually got data on that, where I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to numbers. And I recently did a chart where I showed you how long everybody took to get away from certain conditions. And clearing up your skin does take a long time. Hormonal changes can make a big difference. Stress can make a big difference. Friction can make a big difference. I know that sounds a bit weird, but if you've got something that's constantly rubbing you, you could end up with a little bit of acne. Obviously, cosmetics and medication. So there's loads and loads and loads of things. The reason I know this off the top of my head is because I'm dealing with someone who was really upset about their skin and now beginning to see a lot of differences. Other things are like the good things. Tallow soap as opposed to cosmetics, getting out in the sun, fresh air, lots of sleep, everything like that. So the skin is the biggest organ. It takes the longest to really, really turn around. But when it does, boy, you're just exfoliating actually is a bad thing as well. But anyway, right, let's get into the next thing. Dolly.
It is, Steve, just to add to that really quick, you've mentioned a couple of fair points there. Cortisol, it controls the production of sebum on the skin, which, I mean, if cortisol is raised, and that's something, being somebody who studies cortisol, I completely missed that one. Cortisol, stress situations. And you're right, it took me over 12 months before my acne and boils finally cleared up, and now I'm completely free. So yeah, amazing points.
Yeah, and I think this is a nice one for us to do together. I'll do my bloods, and Richard might want to talk about other things as well. So Dolly's asking, what's the best way to test for an electrolyte imbalance? Well, you can do blood testing, but let's just tell you, that's very limited if you do a blood test, because the electrolyte balance in your blood is so tightly regulated. You do need to go in a little bit more detail. But if you wanted to just know where you are, like a benchmark, you can get what's called a BMP, a basic metabolic panel, and that would be sodium, potassium chloride, bicarbonate, blood urea, nitrogen, creatinine, and glucose. That's quite good. You can get a comprehensive metabolic panel, which is all of those things, with other things like total protein and albumin, which does make a big difference when it comes to electrolyte imbalance. But you can also do urine tests. They're actually pretty good, but you are looking at things that are being excreted. So you're looking at how your kidney is handling your electrolytes, very important. And then you can also do specific hormonal tests. So you could also do that for the person that asked about the acne. But anyway, that's my little whistle stop. But what about Richard? What would you say is the best way?
I think you've nailed it. Look, it's I'm going to use one of your lines, and it's to do with how do you feel. What makes you think you have an electrolyte balance? I mean, if you feel fantastic and energy is brilliant, then you probably don't. Fatigue, nauseousness, feeling dizzy, for example, things like this could be indicative of and low energy and low libido. All of these are indicative of an electrolyte imbalance. But those symptoms are similar for lots of other issues also. So I'd go with the tests that you just suggested, Steve.
Yeah, and it really is very nuanced, because you can get an ionized calcium test, and there's so many other things. It's all about the electrolytes in the tissue rather than in the serum. So right, let's go to the next thing, which is an interesting question. Health Jedi. Any way known to remove microplastics from the body? I do everything I can to avoid now, but probably 25 years plus of life that I didn't know about it. Are we all screwed, or is there anything we can do to remove microplastics and do a bit of detoxing?
Yeah, look, this is something that is a growing concern. Microplastics are everywhere. We're never going to get rid of them. They're not just found in the waters and in the compounds that we buy in the supermarket. They're in the atmosphere. Now, look, the best way, and this is almost going to sound like a cop-out answer, the best way to detox the body is by increasing glutathione, the body's master antioxidant. And guess what the best way to do this is? Is it by supplementation? No, it's by living a ketogenic and carnivore-based lifestyle. The production of ketones increase the production of glutathione. Living this lifestyle allow us to detox to one of our max capacities. There may be levers that we can pull to further aid this along the way, but the biggest lever that you can pull is by not actively consuming them and being as strict as you can, which I don't deem to be strict. I think living this way is highly indulgent. I love the foods that I eat. I try to buy my food from the local butcher. I don't have it wrapped up in plastics and so on and so forth. I avoid sea salt unless it's the Celtic sea salt that the Real Food Company sells. Theirs is tested to be microplastic free. And I just try to remove the compounds from my life, such as the ones that Stephen mentioned earlier in regards to certain cosmetics. I don't use shampoo. I don't use soap. I sound absolutely disgusting, don't I? I don't use any of these compounds. I do occasionally drink. So, I mean, I've got this. I don't drink from it very often. I use this for when I'm on the go. I try to drink through glass bottles and not plastic bottles. You just make every effort that you can to remove them while living the ketogenic and carnivore way lifestyle, and that increase of glutathione should help combat this to the best of our ability.
That's great. I'm just double checking that we're not missing questions out, so that's good. My two penneth is, I think once you've ingested them, they're pretty hard to remove. Sorry to be bleak. But so, I mean, I do everything I can. Everything is out of glass. I don't use plastic bottles, and just basically try to keep away from any exposure to plastics. But it's very disheartening. Very, very disheartening. Okay. Pottinger's cat study showing huge benefits of raw meat over cooked for cats. Do you think this translates to humans as well? Would think maybe humans, mostly carnivores as well, historically.
Yeah, this is something that you've looked into extensively, Steve, isn't it? In regards to the parasites and stuff. I mean, you've referenced some incredible studies. Do you want to speak a little bit about those?
Yeah, well, firstly, I would say that taste is important. If you don't like raw meat, then don't eat it. I eat raw mince. I've had raw liver, all those sort of things. If you're worried about, I don't think they're worried about parasites. I mean, extensive studies of over 6,000 samples from, I think, 22 different states in America. And this was a USDA study. They actually don't like you eating meat, but even they had to admit they didn't find any parasites on any of them. I think it was 2,000 samples of chicken, 2,000 samples of pork. See, notorious ones you're supposed to think are really full of parasites, and 2,000 samples of beef. Didn't find any parasites whatsoever. So, but obviously cooking can actually reduce some of the nutrients will go, but I don't think it's such a big deal. I think you just want to live this life the best you can. So I don't want you cooking your meat up and just being miserable because it's not raw and you think you're going to get slightly more benefit, because there isn't much in it, because most people that are eating this way have huge, brilliant results. I was trying to find the study, but I couldn't bring up. And it's probably a nuance in cats, I think, in animals, because they are, their epigenetic genetics is to not have cooked food, or the proper, if they're brought up properly. My raw carnivore dog is always been raw carnivore, and everybody says he's not like a proper dog. Well, actually, he is like a proper dog, which is one of my arguments when people say I look better than 60. This is how you should look. So my dog will not, if you put some food out for my dog, he will eat what he needs to eat and he will leave food. Not many dogs do that. He will politely wait to eat it, because he's a pack animal. He does not start until we start. We've never trained him to do that. He just does it. And full of energy, never been to the vet in 4.5 years, looks fantastic. It's just, so anyway, I understand why when you look at that, you think, oh, maybe raw food is better than cooked. And I've definitely had people with great results on raw meat diets, especially somebody who was looking to reverse their cancer and did. But I'm not saying it's a cure, by the way. That's just what happened to that one person. So I think just enjoy the meat. If you're going to be carnivore, enjoy it. I think what also happens in the main is the more you do this, the less you do cook your meat. You just end up, in the main, this is just cooking it for less. You start to get to the sort of rare and almost like it's blue and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a great question. I would say if you went down to the numbers, possibly it's a little bit more nutritious, but not to the point where it's significant. And therefore, I would do what works best for you. If you're going to be miserable eating raw, but really happy eating cooked carnivore, then I would go cooked. But good question. Really good question. Next question is, follow up on the no salt. Been doing no salt lion. Seems without salt, no smelling armpits. Add salt back and the smell comes back, which is interesting, which is possibly down to the sort of dehydration and sweat production. So what the heck? Maybe sweating it out. Yeah, you've got it really. So yes, when you have no salt, there is less smell. That's definitely the case. But that's all linked into what you just said. Your armpits will have less sweat because there's less water retention. You have a bit more salt, and therefore you get more sweat, and therefore you get a little bit more smell. And also your concentration of your sweat is going to be a bit different as well.
Yeah, spot on. Completely agree.
All right. Okay, yeah, good.
It's we could get into the ratios and everything else. But it's what you do tend to find is this is more common if you are working out and training, but it is less common if you add in adequate amount of potassium, which sort of evens this out, which comes into the requirement of the ratios of salts depending on your activity. So if you're sedentary, for example, you need a higher potassium sodium ratio, and if you're more active, the sodium needs to be higher, and so on and so forth. But depending on your activity, yeah, it's the salt can lead to this. I don't think I do, and I sweat a lot when I run, but it's almost offset because of the ratio of potassium and other electrolytes that are in there. So it could even be a slight electrolyte imbalance. But do what seems best, isn't it? And what works for you, and how do you feel? Which is the question that Stephen and I always put back out there.
Yeah, and it is about how you look and feel. Definitely, even with bloods. How you present is really important. I mean, when you look at bloods, 70% of healthcare decisions are based on the laboratory feedback. 70%. So 7 out of 10 of you, your blood results are the main factor in what's happening to you. So we're going to rely on 4 grams of blood taken out of 12 pints of blood we've got in our system. 8 to 12 pints of blood. And we take like a little 4-gram thing, a little teaspoon of blood, and then we make all these decisions based on that. Maybe looking at bloods in a different way is an interesting thing to do. Right. Okay. So this is about fat and toxins. Incidentally, that was a little prelude to something I'm writing. The second edition of my Bloods book, I'm actually improving it, adding loads more content and adding more of my voice. And it's less dry and it's a bit more. There's a lot more information. That's coming out soon. Anyway, right. I have heard we store toxins in our fat stores. So for someone who has extra fat, as he burns through it, could those toxins be released, therefore producing side effects such as acne, for example? Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all true. We definitely detox, and as you burn the fat, it releases the toxins, and it can have a little knock-on effect. So, yeah. Did you want to add more to that, or should we move on?
Yeah, spot on. Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Carnivore. I managed to quit smoking this week. Fingers crossed. What does nicotine deplete, especially?
Lots of things. B vitamins in particular, B3, B6, B9, B12. These are things that we don't want to be depleting. The B vitamins are essential for the methylation process. And not to get too geeky, if we look at methylation, there's 5 different cycles that are involved with this. We've got the folate cycle, which is B9, which we understand, and then this goes into the methionine cycle, which is basically the methylation pathway. But downstream of this, we've got other cycles, which the BH4 cycle, I think, which is the neurotransmitter production, the urea cycle, which is downstream from that, and we've also got the transsulfuration cycle or pathway. All of these are connected and linked to, if we follow it back up the chain, to B vitamins. So B vitamins do so much within the body, and they're compounds that we are heavily devoid of in a standard lifestyle. Living this type of lifestyle, we know that the importance of B9, and even when we look at methylation, we know that B9 and B12 are really important. And we know B6 is really important, but I'll tell you the two that don't get an awful lot of airtime. B3, we know, it is super important, niacin, B3, but it gets very little airtime and it's highly important. But the one that everyone seems to miss out in regards to methylation is vitamin B2 or riboflavin. Incredibly important, especially if you have slow methylation, so methylation defects. Adding in B2 can be incredibly important if you do suffer with methylation problems, even if you do not. And typically, an average diet consumes around 0.2 milligrams, and we need between 2 to 3 milligrams. So like 10 times as much B2. So that's what nicotine depletes. So methylation, which is essential for survival. So stay away from the nicotine and the cigarettes. You're doing incredibly well. Do not put them back in, please.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So let's go into the next thing, which is interesting. Matthew again went to the doc, who has a PhD in anthropology, was supportive of carnivore, but actually thought even OMAD could be too much. Says humans probably got a kill, then rested a few days. He visited tribes in Africa also. Thoughts? Yeah, I think that's spot on as well. We were talking about scarcity of food or feasting and fasting, which is the modern way of talking about it. I think this is why when people do extended fast, they're quite surprised that they can do 3 days. I did a 3-day fast. It surprised me how easy it was. So I think there's a lot of truth in that. Definitely, it's an interesting thing. I think when we look at tribes, they go out on a hunt and they eat, but they're not successful every day. So I think it's a good point, actually.
Yeah, for sure. Look, and there's a lot of context that we need to look at in regards to this. Look, generally, I consume 1 to 2 meals a day. Sometimes it's 1, and I try to eat intuitively. I've got no problem with fasting for 2 or 3 days, and I throw that in quite often. Now, when we say to people to put more meals in, it's because they're going through this transition period. So therefore, including more meals with less fat helps with this transition until they can get to the point where they consume food to be more intuitively. So I'm 100% behind this. But what I would add to this, so a caveat that I'd throw into the mix is that our lifestyles these days are very different to our ancestors in regards to what we do. our whole thought process was about survival. We would have hunted and caught an animal and back to the camp. We wouldn't have been behind computer screens. We wouldn't have been in highly stressed jobs. Cortisol is through the roof. The brain function, the brain uses so much energy. Our requirements are a lot higher. Our requirements for certain compounds to help combat increased cortisol, not cholesterol, to combat increased cortisol are really important. So modern life has a lot of different stresses and things that we didn't have, as we were evolving. So I completely agree. I'm not against prolonged periods of fasting, but also if we look from a female perspective, while we would have been doing this, then the females of the tribe would have been back there, maybe cooking and cleaning and doing the bits that the work around, while the men were out hunting, and they would have been consuming more. So their requirement for food is a little bit higher than ours, and this is why we find they thrive on 2 to 3 meals a day opposed to OMAD. But all of these are thrown into the mix. So I think the truth for us in modern day is somewhere in the middle in regards to becoming adapted once we've gone through this transition phase, once we've upregulated all of these enzymes and pathways within the body. Then we begin to consume food intuitively. And as I say, I've got no problems with going days without eating and not suffering. And in fact, when I do this, my brain function increases massively and so on and so forth. But then it just becomes counterintuitive to me if I'm lifting weights and I need to heal and build and repair. And again, it comes to these things with living outside of the box and goals that we're trying to achieve. But modern life is very different to how we would have evolved. But from a biochemical perspective, biological perspective, we're the same. Our requirements for the nutrients are the same, but our demand, I would argue, for most of us is increased compared to our evolutionary predecessors.
Well, that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? Because people say to me, well, why do we have to supplement? Why do we have to do this, that, and the other? And I say, because we're not living an ancestrally appropriate life. I've had 60 years. Why are my teeth rubbish? Well, my teeth are rubbish because I've had 50 years where I ate loads of carbohydrates and lots of fruit. Well, so I can't suddenly on Carnivore have brilliant ancestrally perfect teeth because I'm done. So sometimes we have to be really blunt, like when we talk about the microplastics. We can only do the best we can do in the situation we're given. Look at both Richard and I. We're looking at screens. This is terrible for us circadian. Absolutely terrible. So what would we do? Well, we would try to mitigate it by wearing blue blockers or I've actually bought a different screen now, which is like a blue blocking screen. It's deliberately designed for that. But anyway, right. Great questions coming up tonight, I think.
The really thing nice you and I do, Steve, we put ourselves into the firing line from all this blue light look to bring you these lives every week. We deserve a medal.
Yeah. Oh, it's been a long day today. If only you knew. Right, Nina, would you say that carnivore is a high-fat diet? Is it in every circumstance better to eat more fat, or are there exceptions? Yes, there are more exceptions than you would believe. Many people don't thrive. Well, let's start from the basics. When you first start this way of eating, it's best to just eat whole foods and not add fats. So just have a ribeye, just have an egg, just have a lamb chop, whatever. All right. Normally in nature, the ratio by weight is about 1-to-1 fat to protein. Now, fatty fish like salmon aren't fatty fish, really. They have very good omega-3s, EPA, DHA and all that, but they're actually quite high protein. So I see some people do really well with not adding any fats and going more to the high protein. But is that because of the source of the protein, like the fish for the EPA, DHA? Is it that? I think it's really trial and error. I don't think of this as a high-fat diet. I don't think of it as a low-fat diet. I think of it as a way of eating. I don't even think of it as a diet, to be honest. It's not a fad. It's not sad. It's a way of eating. The proper human diet is human food. And I think when you start eating this way and you get away from all the problems of all the stuff you've eaten, it becomes just more intuitive to just eat the food as it comes with the fat and the protein ratio that nature has provided. And we've grown up eating over, tens of thousands of years. and we just eat this way. So there are exceptions to more fat. There are exceptions to not taking my advice and adding fat. I have many people that have added butter, to every steak. I've had people that add tallow, and that's it. That's the other thing. Your choice of fat can make a big difference. Does it have to be butter? Can it be tallow? Can it be lard? It's a great question, but I don't think this diet is high fat.
Yeah, I agree. I think you've nailed it, Steve. I think it is very much an individual choice, and very much to do with the circumstance of the person. I.e., if you suffer with cancer, then high fat would be more beneficial, and so on and so forth. So eat intuitively, eat as nature intended, and some days it's high fat, some days it's low fat. But Steve, I think you've covered it.
Thank you very much. I just want to also say thank you to everyone watching tonight. When we started this, we didn't know what viewership we would get, and we were always happy if we got over 100. Now we got 170 people watching currently, and maybe some on Facebook as well, but they don't like to give us the numbers. So I want to thank you. But if you really want to help us, please smash the like button. I don't know why people say that. Just press the like button, or subscribe, or share, or make a comment. It's great. Really helps us. Right. I cannot pronounce this name, but I think it's Maxium. Hi, I've just started a physiotherapy master's degree. What do you think the impact of the carnivore diet would be on my future practice? You'll have less clients. But the ones that come that aren't carnivore, if you get them eating low carb, you'll have much less problems with sorting out their aches and pains, because it will be less inflammatory for them. And this is somebody before the restrictions used to do face-to-face rehab. And I promise you, it makes you feel very happy to see so many people doing so well.
Yeah, spot on. Completely agree.
Okay, all right, I'm going to leave this one for you, because while you're doing that, I'm going to get the link to our school group. So Brendan,
I've just popped that into the comments, the school group. But yeah, wait, sorry, you carry on.
Brilliant, that's brilliant. Save me a job. I will then screenshot some of the questions we haven't got to. I eat carnivore, 1.5 pounds of steak. I enjoy maple syrup with double cream. Does that daily treat, sabotage, by the way, take out the word treat, sabotage, of maple syrup detract? From 1 year on, and on beef and nothing else, I'm feeling and doing great. Right, yes, if you're doing great, ignore what I just said. That's really working for you. Fantastic. But the question, does that daily treat of maple syrup detract? I would say it probably does. It probably does. Maybe try a month without it and see how you feel. Richard.
Yeah. Brendan, I believe, was just on the live in Anthony Chaffee's group with myself recently. So thank you very much for following us over to the YouTube live. So Brendan, look, these things they're not ideal. We would have consumed some form of glucose, during our evolutionary period, but it wouldn't have been every day. I think things like this are okay occasionally. They are going to cause damage, but this is all about the rule and not the exception. You're pulling so many of the right levers that the damage that it's causing is probably going to be negligible. But what do you want to be is the question. And having these sabotage days, as Stephen just says, or treats, look, these are fine. But the problem with every day is they tend to take over. The beast ends up taking over. It creeps up upon you like a monster. You end up having a little bit more and a little bit more every day. And then it's twice a day. And before you know it, you've fallen off the wagon and you're scratching your head thinking, I can't go back to all of this. So look, I'm not going to ever be the person to tell you not to do something that doesn't seem to be causing a problem. But think of volume, think of how often you're doing this, and maybe just do it once every other day for now, and then maybe drop it to once every 3 days. And who knows, maybe you'll get to the point where you look forward to it as a Friday night treat, and then eventually you won't even want it anymore. And that's the reality of living this lifestyle and thriving, is that you really don't want these things anymore. Your taste buds change. Everything that your body wants completely changes. So that's as quickly as I can in the 30 seconds that we've got left, it would be my advice. So, and I'll pass back to Steve.
Yeah, brilliant. We put the link to school in the description. Once you've joined, you go here and then you go to the calendar, Look at this. You go to the calendar and there's our live, 8 p.m., which is where we're going to go in a second. 8 p.m. We're going to do an extra 30 minutes. If you want to do an extra 30 minutes with us, live question and answers, just go to www.school.com and then /low-carb. That's it. And hopefully we'll see you over there. For all you lovely YouTubers that's watched the last hour, thank you so much. So good. Thank you so much for liking and commenting. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Have a good evening.
Thank you all.